make sure these tighten this a little bit so it doesn't twist around. Can you hear me okay? All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Seth Bodner, president of the University of Montana, and I'm so pleased to have everyone here tonight. You know, we had a nice reception beforehand, and I'd echo what I said to that group, and that the folks who are in this room are a great example of what makes Missoula such a wonderful place to live, to learn, to contribute. We have community and state leaders here. We have faculty members from across disciplines. We have students. We have innovative business leaders, friends of the university. And I'm just so grateful for you all being here. As we get started, I would like to thank our interpreters for this evening, Amy Davis and Bonnie Curry. So thank you for You know, the role of a university, the role of UM, we see ourselves as people committed to shaping leaders who can work across disciplines, who can tackle problems at the intersection, who can get their hands dirty trying to solve some of our world's more intractable problems. And tonight we have two people who dedicated their lives to doing just that. And I think we're in for a real treat this evening. Just in terms of protocol, how we're going to do this, I'm going to facilitate a discussion for about 30, 35, 40 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to questions that we've received. We actually have cards. Hopefully some of you have, or all of you have gotten the cards distributed with an email address, which is pls@umontana.edu. Please submit your questions to that, and we'll bring those questions out. We'll stop accepting them right around 8 o'clock. So get your questions in, and we'll make sure we get those teed up for our two distinguished guests. You know, we are incredibly honored tonight to have here with us, as I said, two people who've dedicated their lives to public service. Larry Summers, a scholar, a practitioner, and Max Baucus, whose 36-year tenure as a senator from our great state and ambassador. You know, we're going to cover a little bit about higher education and a lot about the role of the United States in a new world order, a little bit about economic and trade policy. We'll go around the globe a little bit. These are individuals who've had decades of influence, experience, and we're so proud to have you both here. I do want to briefly, two individuals who need very little introduction, but I want to introduce them both. First, Dr. Summers. He is the Charles W. Eliot University Professor and President Emeritus of Harvard University, where he became a full professor at the incredibly old age of 28. He, over the past 2 decades, has served in a series of senior policy positions: the 71st Secretary of the Treasury for President Clinton, the Director of the National Economic Council for President Obama, Vice President of Development Economics, and the Chief Economist of the World Bank. In 1987, Dr. Summers became the first social scientist ever to receive the annual Alan T. Waterman Award of the National Science Foundation. And in 1993, he was awarded the John Bates Clark Medal, which is given every 2 years to the outstanding American economist under the age of 40. Dr. Summers has played a key role in addressing every major financial crisis for the last 2 decades. In the 90s, he was a leader in crafting the U.S. response to the international financial crises arising in Mexico, Brazil, Russia, Japan, and Asian emerging markets. And then, of course, as one of President Obama's chief economic advisors, Dr. Summers' thinking helped shape the U.S. response to the 2008 financial crisis, and just has been a phenomenal leader. He's been recognized as one of our most influential thinkers by Time, Foreign Policy, Prospect, The Economist magazines, among many others, and he continues to help move forward the debate on national and
Seth, I think we should devote this entire evening to your talking about Max and me. This is something we could really enjoy.
But most importantly,
listen to all this, I'm wondering why I'm here.
But most importantly, his wife, Dr. Lisa New, a professor of English at Harvard, is also here with us and gave great talks today. So we're very happy that they traveled all the way from Brookside, Massachusetts, to be here with us this evening. And of course, Max Baucus, again, somebody who needs no introduction here in Missoula, where he got his political start. so long ago. We were just talking about that a little bit earlier this evening. And Max was the U.S. Senator from Montana for nearly 36 years. Longest serving senator in Montana's history. And on December 26, 2013, he was nominated by President Obama to serve as the 11th U.S. ambassador to China. And he served in that role from 2014 to 2017. As many of you know, Senator Baucus was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, played an influential role on many debates throughout his tenure. One of the interesting points here is in 2009, he cast his 11,000th Senate vote. So has weighed in on an incredible number of impactful issues for this country. He's, of course, a native Montanan, and he represents the service ethic so apparent in Montana, and has worked across the aisle to the betterment of this state, to this country, to this world. And we're so happy that he and Mel are working. His wife, Mel Haynes, is also with us here tonight, and he and Mel are working in building out the Baucus Institute here in our School of Law to honor and build upon the ways that Max has served, and to enable others to serve this country, this state. And we're so grateful for your presence here tonight, but also for your continued work with the University, Max. Thank you very much. So, as this is an institution of higher education, I want to just start with one quick question on higher ed. In a recent New York Times piece that I think you've both read, many of you have read, by Frank Bruni, who asks how to get the most out of one's pivotal college years. He claims that how a student goes to school matters much, much more than where, and that the how makes all the difference. So I'm curious, what role did higher education play in shaping your professional and personal lives, and what approach did you take to being a student, and how can we ensure that we're in these very pivotal years giving our students the best opportunities? Maybe we start with Larry and then to Max.
I'm not sure my undergraduate years are an example to others. I would advise any student here that you are the curator of your future self. You are, while you're in the university, determining what the opportunities that will be open to your future self are. And so you have to choose. You can eat dinner with the same people every night, do the same job after your freshman year, after your sophomore year, after your senior year, take only subjects that make you entirely comfortable, and even, I guess this resonates with what's in the news, go through important parts of the school year in a drunken haze. That's a choice you can make, but it will have consequences for all that follows. Or you can meet as many different people as you possibly can, have as many different experiences as you possibly can, study things that you don't know anything about to see whether they light a fire within you, and try to make the connections and relationships that can serve you through a lifetime. And that's the choice you make when you're in school. Most of us don't know exactly what we're going to do when we're 18 years old or when we're 21 years old. We kind of follow a path, and we see what happens and what strikes a chord within us and what opportunities present themselves. And the more you leave yourself open to opportunity, the better a preparation you will have given yourself. And so just maximize the number of things that you can touch that have the possibility to light a fire within you would be my advice to students. And my advice to a university would be uphold excellence, set high standards, insist that students be required to expose themselves to a wide variety of ideas, and recognize, as you provide an education, that if you never make a student uncomfortable with respect to their preconceptions, that is the biggest failure of all. And that your job is to challenge and open and test the preconceptions of your students.
Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, I agree, and almost everybody in the audience would agree with what Larry said. A couple things. In addition, I think that education's changed a lot from what it was when Larry and I were undergraduates. Back then, to some degree, you go to college, you get your diploma, you hang it on the wall or something, you get a job, and you go up from there. I think it's totally different. Right now, it's continual. It's important, I think, for a university college to develop the mindset of curiosity, inquisitiveness, always learning, because we're going to be learning, each of us, as much after college as we are during college. So it's developing that mindset of learning, continual learning, because that's, with the world changing so quickly, things happening so quickly, we have to, as people, have those attributes. Second, developing critical thinking. I'm not talking about negative critical thinking. I'm talking about analytic critical thinking. I think today, with internet, smartphones, social media, there's a tendency for people to tend to accept what they see on their smartphone or on Facebook and so forth, and not critically ask the question, was that accurate? Is that true? And it will help get longer attention spans, which we need, I think, in our country these days. Add to that, one book that I think should be required reading for everybody, in college or not, is a book by Mortimer Adler called How to Read a Book. And it's fantastic. The basic point of the book is how to read a book. It's critical analysis, critical thinking, engaging the author in a dialogue. This author spent a lot of time writing this book. So at the very least, you as a reader should spend as much time engaging the author, whether you agree, asking yourself, do you agree or disagree with what the author of this book said. And I've given the book to friends, family, sons, and all that. I just think it's such a great book. In addition to that, I think it's important, as Larry touched on, to develop a higher threshold for risk. I think in life we tend to wish we'd taken more risks as we grew up. We don't, we're not upset with risks we didn't take, we're upset with risks we should have taken. Because I think when people take more risks, they tend to be smart risks usually. It's like a good business person have a bias for action, doing something now. Don't just keep putting it off on the side. Because when you take risks and you have a bias for action, you're going to move forward, and your next decision, if your last was a mistake, you're going to correct for it the next time around. It's just, so take risks. I wish I had taken more risks, frankly, when I was in college all life. Not stupid risks, but things that, push myself a little more. As Larry said, take the tougher course. Take maybe more credits. Go the extra mile. And then, as Larry said, take crazy courses and nothing really about it. One of my favorite courses in college was Christian existentialism. I'm not a philosopher. I was scared to death when I took this course. Totally scared. And I read books and I wrote the paper as best I could. I got A+ on that paper. It scared, I mean, surprised the bejeebies out of me. I didn't know what I was doing. And add to that is community service. I think that at all levels, high schools, colleges, it just help engender service. It's community service. I think the most noble human endeavor is service. It's service to community, to church, to family, public service, whatever. It's service. And I think that the more college helps engender appreciation for service, the better off we're all going to be.
I think those are, thank you both for sharing that. That's
Can I just add?
Yeah.
Add one thing. Max emphasized the idea of learning throughout your lifetime. Of course, the corollary of that is that the function of college is less to teach you a set of facts or even a set of specific skills, but to teach you how to learn, how to develop skills. And there are many things that I have admired about Max. I have known Max pretty well since he voted for my first confirmation as Undersecretary of the Treasury, literally 25 years ago. And we've been friends ever since. And what has always impressed me about Max is how much he wanted to learn about whatever issue he was going to be engaged with. Whether it was the latest economist's thinking about tax policy, or how to think about economic development in rural areas, or how to understand in very different ways the mixture of communism and capitalism that the Chinese economy represents. There were plenty of senators who were interested in talking to me when I was Treasury Secretary. There were many fewer who were equally interested in talking to me when I was Professor Summers. And Max was such a senator. He lived what he said. And I think that's got a lot to do with why he had such a spectacularly successful 36-year run in the Senate. And in that way, Max has been a real inspiration and example to me.
Larry, you're too kind. That's very nice. You're too kind.
I think it to us all. I'm struck by both of your comments, and I think we talked a little bit about this in our session this afternoon with Dr. Summers. But 2 weeks ago, many of you were here, actually downtown. We had David Brooks, and he talked about the point of college. Is that it is to introduce us to new things to love. And you mentioned to light those fires, to take those risks, to learn about new things, and really start a fire of lifelong learning and curiosity.
Let me jump in, though. That could be dangerous. One of my shortcomings is probably the other side of what Larry just said. Too interested in too many subjects. And you got to choose. You got to set priorities. I'm reminded of a book that's out recently. It's by Ray Dalio, a big hedge fund mogul. And one of his main points is to succeed in life, that is, from his perspective, you got to focus on what it is you want to work on, then be focused on that, and don't get diverted with all the noise, the side stuff that's going on. Stay focused on what it is that you want to accomplish and stick with it. And it's, when you're in college, it's hard. When I was in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was 28 years old. And so it's everybody's different.
I want to, Max, you talked a lot about critical thinking. You talked, alluded to the tendency, I think, in many to live within the echo chamber of social media, to not really assess the veracity of information. And I think moving maybe more to the political climate standpoint, much has been written about whether the current political climate suggests a fossilized tribalism. I'm curious, having spent many decades in Washington, back and forth between Washington and Montana. Your assessment of the situation today, what's, you know, is it truly a fossilized tribalism? And what do you attribute this to? And where do you see hope? Maybe start with Max and then move to Larry.
Answer is yes. It's tribalized.
Yeah.
And it's worse, it seems, every year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. This is a hard question to solve. There are no quick, easy silver bullets here. A few little things come to mind. I think it was a mistake for Congress to outlaw earmarks. Because earmarks, those legislative provisions and bills, which, you know, for a highway or for building or whatnot, they were the glue that kept people talking to each other. And they were all transparent. People knew what they were. But the press just basted us. So we, being politically correct, outlawed earmarks. It was a mistake. Second, and Mike Mansfield reminded me of this. It's just, you know, remember Max, the other guy's not always wrong. And you're not always right. And it's helping to foster listening to the other side a little more than we now do. One thing I did, I'm very proud of, I talked to, when I was chairman of the committee, or ranking, goes back and forth, myself and Chuck Grassley. Chuck Grassley from Iowa, I said, Chuck, let's you and I meet in my office or your office, doesn't matter, make any difference, once a week, 5:30, every Tuesdays, clear the decks. We can talk about our kids, we talk about legislation, we meet. Yeah, good idea. So we did, and guess what happened? After about a month, our trade staffs started talking to each other. Then our health staffs started talking to each other. And then our tax staffs started talking to each other. Our committee of jurisdiction over trade, tax, and health care, and so on and so forth. If you were a fly on the wall after about 6 months of this, we did this for 10, 12 years. Only missed maybe 20, no less, fewer than that, maybe 10 times. You would think that we were one office. We were all working together, trying to solve problems, get legislation passed. No acrimony, no bitterness, not adversarial. It was teamwork. And so part of the answer, I think, is if can of help force people to be together in person, and talk to each other. One problem now with texting and all this, we're not physically, personally together as much as people. And so the more we can kind of help force ways for us to be together more that'll help. People talk about, gerrymandering, that's part of the problem. It probably is. The big problem is money. All the money in politics today just forces, people to spend a lot of money, take extreme negative positions. This gets a little theoretical, but I think the internet and social media tend to encourage negative thoughts, and Facebook more than positive thoughts. But anyway, it's a big question, and this is very glib. It's extremely glib. I think we'll begin to get a handle on all of this. This may sound a little bit facile, but when we get a president who is a unifier, not a divider, a president who has gravitas, a president who's experienced, and you can just tell, talking to him or her, that he or she has his head screwed on straight, feet from the ground, and understands world affairs, understands economics, and is a unifier in bringing people together. Mm-hmm. That is so important today. Trump is the exact opposite. Divider, worse than a divider. He just is a social divider as well as a legislative divider. So it's incumbent upon all of us as we move toward the 2020 presidential election to really dig down deep and try to find somebody who can begin to address this.
Could you think, I just have to ask, because I'm sure people in the audience are thinking, 5 or 6 people either side of the aisle that you think fit that, have the gravitas, have the experience, again, either party.
Yes. There's no question.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name names here.
Okay.
But there's no question in my mind.
Good try, Seth.
There's no question. Look, most members of Congress, I'll talk about the Senate, are good well-meaning people.
Yeah.
They want to do a good job. But right now, the system is forcing this tribalism. It's forcing this partisanship. And so, but I thought stupid. Basically, there's no doubt in my mind there are several each side.
Any thoughts on what we can do here at a university, we as community leaders? They're interested in your thoughts. What we can do. We're not going to change the system. We're not going to take away social media. Any advice or guidance for us?
You were president, university.
I think it comes back to some of the things we touched on already. I think the great thing about universities is that they're places that are based on the power of ideas rather than the idea of power. And by standing up for the proposition that every argument can legitimately be challenged, that it matters what's true, not who is saying what's true. I think by developing that culture, universities can do something positive. I also think something else, and this is quite controversial, and not everybody would agree with this. But I think if we're going to succeed, we are going to need, going forward, a stronger set of ideas about what it means to be American and what all Americans have in common and what rights and also what responsibilities American citizens have, and how that comes out of our history and our traditions. And I think if those ideas are going to come, they need to come from thinkers. And those thinkers are most likely to be located within universities. I think there has been a tendency in universities, as we've done what we've got an absolute obligation to do, to combat discrimination, to make the American experience everybody's America, everybody's experience, not just one group that used to be a majority's experience. And universities have made an immense contribution by doing that. But I think we have to balance that celebration of each identity with an emphasis on what we have all in common. And that if we're able to develop the concepts of that commonness, we are likely to be more united and therefore more cohesive. I want to say one other thing. I yield to no one, not even Max, in my lack of enthusiasm for the current presidential administration. That said, I just want to say that the sun can still shine. That American history is a story of self-denying prophecy. People thought in the late 1970s that we had a national malaise and the country was no longer governable. People thought in 1960 that we were being surpassed by the Soviet Union. People thought in 1990 that the Cold War was over and Japan had won. People thought that we were not going to remain a cohesive union, and 1 million people died, keeping us a cohesive Union. Patrick Henry declared in 1792 that the spirit of the revolution had already been lost. And I believe the history of America is a history of resilience through self-denying prophecy. It is precisely the Jeremiads of doom and the concern that we are off track and the force and the extent to which that is said that leads us to get back on track. And in a great deal of what I see, it is the self-restorative forces that I believe have carried America forward for 250 years of great concern about the future that will carry us forward through these very, very difficult moments. And when I meet the kinds of students that I had a chance to meet a few today here at the University of Montana, the kinds of students I'm privileged to teach at Harvard, yes, there are going to be problems, and yes, there are going to be reversals, and yes, there are going to be challenges, but I believe we will surmount those obstacles. And I can say one thing, and I suspect Max will agree with this. I have a chance, giving economic advice, consulting, to travel a great deal around the world. And with all our problems, I would rather play the hand dealt in 2018 to the United States than the hand dealt to the leader of any other country in this world. And I think we make a great mistake if we forget that.
Well said. I don't know, Max. Next time somebody asks you a list of the people, those leaders that can bring the country together, maybe Dr. Summers ends up on that list. But next time, you don't have to defer that question. You got one.
Right.
But you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Larry's right. There is tremendous resilience in America.
Yeah.
I know I often like to give meetings, remind ourselves and sit back and reflect a minute or two how lucky we are to be Americans. We are incredibly lucky to be Americans. And of course, we in Montana, sorry Larry, very lucky to be Montanans at the same time. And with that recognition, I think that helps us not be quite as negative or pessimistic as we otherwise might be, because we are incredibly lucky. My slight concern, though, is, back up, I think we can withstand one administration of Donald Trump. That is, after 2020, with a new president, there's enough resilience. We'll start coming back. We have to repair relationships around the world. A lot we're going to have to do. But if he is elected the second term, then I think we do have a problem with respect to America's future and America's resilience. I might add, too, that one little question we have to think about is China.
Yeah.
Because China's, it's going places, and we have to figure out how we deal with China as we work on our resilience.
And that's kind of where I wanted to take us. As we look at the global situation right now, we're seeing, a troubling trend away from free trade, and we're seeing that very clearly with China. And I'm interested, obviously, we're all interested, Max, on your view of our relationship with China.
Larry's the economist. He's the expert in all this.
Yeah. Maybe you start, and Larry can add to it.
Okay, I'll start. Of course, we're very concerned.
Yeah.
It's a trend in the world for a lot of reasons. Rise of authoritarianism is part of it. It's just extremely unfortunate. It's negative. I think in part it's because when we Americans try to put together trade agreements, the best example I can think of is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. which, as you know, is agreement with the United States and 11 other countries in Asia primarily to raise the standards of trade, higher environmental standards, labor standards, intellectual property protection standards, etc. And we built. We got out. And it was during the time that I served in China, this was the greatest geopolitical mistake we made during that term. Or to put it differently, that's the most important geopolitical matter to cross my desk. So important, I took it upon myself to fly back to Washington 2 weeks before the election and personally lobbied 45 different members of Congress, both sides of the aisle, both bodies. And I could tell right off the top, it's going nowhere. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and even Hillary had killed it on the left, and Donald Trump had killed it on the right. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. The bastards over there would say to me, Vietnam, for example, Max, you got to pass this. Why? Well, we like playing you off against China. And if you exit the region, then it's much harder for us to play you off against China. China gains an advantage. And China, as you know, is putting together all these different trade deals. It's got this RCEP and AIP and Belt Road Initiative, et cetera. And as I'm just saying that when we exit, we become protectionist. It really hurts us. I think America first is a mistake. It's what it is. It means America retreat. It should be America lead, not America retreat. And I think the way to solve some of the political problems with trade agreements is for the United States to show greater sympathy and understanding for people who lose jobs allegedly on account of trade. You know, we have this thing called TAA. It doesn't amount to much. But if the TPP had a stronger provision in it to show to Americans, workers, that, hey, we hear you. You're part of America too, and here's what we're doing to make sure you're part of this. Then I think it's a decent chance that TPP would have passed.
Larry, thoughts? China?
Let me say a few things. First, Max is right about the 2020 presidential election. I'm a Democrat. I've always been strongly for the Democratic presidential candidate. It never occurred to me to say that George W. Bush was dangerous. It never occurred to me to say that George Bush was dangerous. It never occurred to me to say that Ronald Reagan was dangerous. I wake up every morning thinking that Donald Trump and what he needs domestically and internationally is dangerous. The 2020 presidential election will be the most consequential presidential election of my lifetime. And I think Max
I agree with
is
that.
absolutely
I agree with that.
right about that. I think the defining challenge when the history of our time is written 150 years from now, I think the third story will be the end of the Cold War. I think the second story will be the struggles and challenges between the Islamic world and other parts of the world. And I think the first story will be the rise of China, India, and Asia. And how the United States responds to that and how we interact with China is probably the question ahead of us over the next decade that's most historically important. We need to be honest and recognize that we believed some things that have turned out not to be true. Many believed that a prosperous China and an increasingly prosperous China would become an increasingly democratic China and a China that shared on all kinds of geopolitical questions more interests with the United States. And we have to acknowledge that that didn't happen. And the question, though, is what the American strategy should be going forward. And I think there are a few things we need to recognize in setting that strategy. One is linear extrapolation usually works for a while, but not for too long. People thought Russia was going to surpass us by 1980. That's what John Kennedy believed on the day he died. People thought Japan was going to be a superstate. That didn't happen. We need to recognize that China has achieved fantastic things and has great opportunities, but it has immense challenges. Average living standards are what they are in the United States in the 1930s. The rate at which their population is going to age dwarfs any kind of problem we have with entitlements. The challenge of maintaining loyalty to the Communist Party without the kind of bribes and petty corruption that have dominated their system are very large. So they're going to have large challenges in the years ahead. And we need to recognize that if our policy is one of blanket condemnation and rejection of China, if we declare, as too many in the Trump administration have, that we've got a new Cold War on, only it's more economic, and this time it's with China, what we will do is strengthen every faction in China that is hostile to the United States. That we will strengthen every nationalist faction in China. And we may decide afterwards that we were right, but we were only right because of the forces that we set in motion. And so we need to decide what our central priorities are. We can't have cyber attacks on the United States coming from China, and we need to respond very strongly. Where there's blatant expropriation of the intellectual property of U.S. companies, we need to be prepared to retaliate. But we cannot craft the narrative that the story of the next quarter century is going to be some kind of zero-sum competition between China and the United States without creating a disaster for both sides. And my fear is that we are on a path to doing it. And even as we are doing it, we are doing our best to not have allies in the overly harsh contest we are creating. Max mentioned the mistake that was TPP. If we are so focused on China as a principal competitor, by what possible conceivable logic would we be talking about imposing tariffs on Canadian cars for national security reasons? There are 3 times as many people working in the manicure industry as there are in the steel industry. And there are 50 times as many people working using steel as there are working making steel. What conceivable logic supports putting heavy tariffs on steel, making 6 million jobs less competitive, in an effort to save a much smaller number of jobs that are largely being displaced by technology in any event? So we need a smart strategy that focuses on our core interests, that understands that we're no longer going to be able to dominate and decree our way through the shaping of the global economic system in the way we once did. but that does what Americans tend to be worst at, which is respecting other nations, not trying to define them in our image or bend them to our will. And Xi Jinping is right when he says we need a new kind of relationship between superpowers and new kind of great power relationship. But that relationship needs to be based on mutual respect, identification of core interest, and compromise. I think if we do that, we will be best positioned whatever may come. If China continues to grow towards the sky, or if China starts to encounter substantial economic difficulties and move to turn to nationalism. But I'm not sure that I see the will right now in either party to adopt that kind of posture towards China. And that leaves me very concerned about our geopolitical future.
Thank you.
Let me just, I just like to chime in there. Mike Mansfield used to always say that the most important bilateral relationship was U.S. and Japan. That's when he was ambassador to Japan. If Mike were alive today, I think he'd amend that and say it's U.S.-China. China's population is 4 times ours. They got the wind at their back. They bounced in their step. They've grown so much in the last 40 years. And nationalism is quite strong. It's been said many times, and based upon my experience, I think it's true, that Chinese think that, for thousands of years, China, Middle Kingdom, was the center of the universe. Everybody kowtowed to China back for thousands of years. Then there's an aberration in the last 200 years. They call it the age of barbarianism, where they looked inward, and where Japan, the United States, Britain, opium wars and so forth, took advantage of China. They feel that period is now gone. That's history. Now it's their time again to regain their rightful place in history. That'd be a bit of an overstatement, but not too much of an overstatement. So the question is, what do we do about it? Larry's right. During the time I was there, I could see American exceptionalism reigning. Oh, we Americans, we're exceptional. We just keep working with the Chinese, whether it's education, or whether it's military, not much military, the political, and all that. Keep engaging in China. They'll be more like us. We tend to forget that we, as a Judeo-Christian country with our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, independent judiciary, transparency, free press, that other countries are the same. They're not. That most countries, most people don't live under that kind of regime. Certainly not in China. Authoritarian, one-party rule, no independent judiciary, no rule of law, no free speech. I mean, it's just different. And combine the two, authoritarian government, with where they think their place in history is, that they kind of think they're on the march now. They're going places. So the next question is, what do we do about all that? Larry touched on right now, totally wrong approach. Totally wrong approach. This Trump administration containment. President Trump right now, it seems, is not just wants to enact tariffs to try to correct some protectionism in China, namely the forced technology transfer, IP theft, and other protectionism. Rather, it seems that Trump wants to, quote, contain China. China will not be contained. There ain't no way that China's going to allow itself to be contained. They're pushing together on this Made in China 2025. I think it's brilliant if they're doing that. We need a Made in America 2025, frankly. Part of the solution here is not just blame China, although they do practice unfair trade practices, but also is to bolster America up. I think we talk about our infrastructure and educational system and technology and so forth and all the new technology of the future. That's what we need to do. I'll spend more time and effort on all that. Meantime, we got to figure what we do about China. My experience, frankly, it was a big disappointment in my judgment. We, America, did not have a China strategy. There is no strategic plan. Rather, we are totally ad hoc, totally reactive, off balance, push, back-footed. We just don't have a strategic long-term plan. China's got a plan, very long-term plan. They think they know where they're going. It's a vision. It's become number one in many respects, certainly economic, and then because economic power projects power almost more than does military power ultimately, and that's where they think they're going. Now, Larry's right; they got a ton of problems, no question, and Larry touched on a lot of them. But my judgment is they're tough. They'll figure out a way to deal with those problems. It's whether it's the demographic or the corruption and so forth. They know they have those problems, and all leaders want to keep power. They want to stay in power. So how does the Communist Party stay in power? By taking care of the people. It's that Faustian bargain. People taken care of, they're not going to question the legitimacy of the government. So they're going to try to do all they can to make sure people's incomes go up enough, keep them happy, address air pollution, water pollution, demographic issues that we just mentioned, health care, you name it. It's they know they're there, and they're going to try their doggonedest. So what we need, my judgment, some kind of an American strategy, not some kind, a strong, thoughtful strategy, how to deal with China, so that when they cross the line, we've anticipated that, told them privately, not through Twitter, not through tweets, privately, okay, you crossed the line, we can't let you go there. That's just anathema to us. And back it up and show that we mean it. We've done that. We did it once with an island. It's a Scarborough Shoal, just off the Philippines. I'm very proud of this. Kind of my idea. During a summit, President Xi came over to visit with Obama. The day before, having lunch with Ash Carter, Defense Secretary. All talk about China. There were a bunch of people there. Didn't amount to much at the lunch. But afterwards, I walked up to Ash Carter and said, Ash, you know what? This is virtual war. The president, you know what should be done here? The president should look President Xi Jinping straight in the eye with as few people in the room as possible and tell him, no, you're not going to militarize Scarborough Shoal. That's crossing the line. That's too far. Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great way to do all that. Obama did that, and Xi blinked. They did not go to the Scarborough Shoal. So you got to stand up to China. China, in many ways, is a bully. Give a bully an inch, it takes a mile. And bullies will back down more quickly than you think. It takes strength. Larry touched on another point here, which is so critical. It has to be a unified effort, American along with other countries, not just the United States. It's EU, Japan, so forth. I won't take too much time here, but I'll give an example where we did just that in concert, working with other countries. It's called a banking regulation. And I worked really hard on that thing. And that's the one instance I can think of where China backed off. They did not go through with the banking regulation. Why? Because we orchestrated American Chamber of Commerce, American China Business Council, the European Chamber of Commerce, the European Commission, Cadendran, which is a big Japanese business organization, South Korea, all together said, China, no, don't go there. That's anathema to all of us, and they backed off. So it just takes respect, mutual respect, stand up for what's right, but it takes a strategy, a plan, which we do not now have.
Thank you both. I think this is arguably one of the most important issues that's not talked about nearly enough. I have so many more questions that I would personally like to ask, but I know that we want to open it up to the group. So I think we have a list of questions that have been sent in. Thank you very much. So, we have nice 5 questions here. So I'm gonna take them straight in order. First one's a pretty interesting one. So, and this is for both of you. Following the Great Recession, only one person was prosecuted for what many saw as widespread fraud. Why only one person?
Look, I think it's fair. The question of accountability is a fair one. I'm not sure there was. Maybe there was widespread fraud. Maybe there wasn't. I don't know. One of the differences between the administration I was part of and the current administration is that people in the White House didn't get to mess around in the affairs of the Justice Department. So I actually don't know anything about the consideration of prosecutions during the Obama administration. I think it's important to remember that stupidity, even gross stupidity, is not a crime. And so if you ran a bank into the ground by making a ton of bad loans to people who really weren't creditworthy, that was a terrible thing to have done, but you don't go to jail for that in America. I do think there are legitimate questions about whether more CEOs should have been forced to quit their jobs, whether more boards of directors who had failed should have resigned in a way that was more humiliating to them. And I'm not prepared to warrant that no one else should have been prosecuted. But I do think it's important to understand that very bad things can happen without anyone being criminal. And so I'd be surprised if the questioner really can be certain that there were large crimes committed that caused the financial crisis.
I might say, it doesn't look good when lots of folks lose their homes during the financial crisis, and when the bank presidents do well. Banks have done well as a consequence. A lot of people have lost it. It just does not look good. And it raises the question of income inequality in America, which I think is a huge problem. It's getting worse. And it's not just America, it's worldwide. It's a problem in China. The maldistribution of income in China is even worse than it is here in the United States. But that doesn't, two wrongs don't make a right. One thing that's interesting to me, and like Larry's response to it, I saw a chart last year. Income inequality of America reached its peak. Guess what year? 1929. And then the income inequality came down during the New Deal and after the war and so forth. Now it's climbed back up again. Today it's back up to where it was in 1929. It's add to that, it's a big problem in Montana. Our suicide rate in Montana is the highest in the nation. And we all have some ideas why, but partly it's income inequality. There are just so few opportunities for people in our state, which has partly led to that. It's really a tough problem. In the Congress, we enacted many provisions to try to address it. Not a work, basically. It's a low-income tax credit, give them more of a boost. I mean, incentives for more savings. None of it really made much of a difference, frankly. An economist at one institution, which I'll not name because it's so pessimistic, and I went to that school, wrote a book basically and concluded that government can do virtually nothing to address income inequality. It only gets addressed when there's a cataclysmic, almost a catastrophic event. He studied hundreds of years in various countries and so on. I'm not that pessimistic. But I will say that the rich get richer the more income you have, the more educated you are, the more money you make, and so forth. And the other flip side is you don't. And it's got to be addressed.
I think, Larry, you've called the class divide the problem of the 21st century. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, and how does this incredibly important issue, was actually the next question on my list had we gotten to it, how do we think about this issue, both from a continued economic growth standpoint, from an equity standpoint, from a national unity standpoint?
In 1960, the difference between somebody in the top 20% of the income distribution and somebody in the bottom 20% of the income distribution and how long they lived was a couple of years. Today, that difference in how long they lived is more than a decade. To put that in perspective, if you eliminated all cancer, it would change life expectancy by about 4 years. So something stunning has happened that is dividing the life experiences of different groups in the country. I think it's a huge question how we think about that and how we talk about that. And of course, we should have a more progressive tax system than the one we do. It's kind of beyond belief that Warren Buffett's secretary pays taxes at a higher rate than Warren Buffett does. There's a ton of loopholes that need to be and should be fixed. But ultimately, I'm not sure the answer, and that's really important to do, but I'm not sure the main answer can be that we need fewer billionaires. I ask myself, suppose America had 50 more people like Steve Jobs. There'd be more inequality, but it would be good. It would be good for the country as a whole. And so where I would like to see us focus is on making sure that there's real and genuine equality of opportunity for every child born in this country. And that the same privileges that my children enjoy are enjoyed by every child in this country. The ability, without question, to get first-rate, cutting-edge medical care. An educational system that challenges them, sets high standards for them, and asks the best of them. It is a tragedy that, as someone put it, the dumbest rich kids in America are more likely to attend college than the smartest poor kids in America. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think if we can restore what we have lost, the sense that has been there as best one can tell, they didn't have public opinion polls in 1910, but as best one can tell, the vast majority of Americans, up until about 2 decades ago, believed that their children were going to live much better lives than they did. And if we can restore that sense by investing in our children, investing in our infrastructure, investing in our technology, I think we can have the kind of optimism that we want and we need. And so, yes, I really have fought for more progressive taxation. But I think it's very different to achieve more equality by building up those who've been left behind than by tearing down those who've gotten ahead. And I'd like to see us take approaches that focus on universalizing the good things that the most fortunate Americans enjoy.
So at that, we've got a good one here, good advice question. So given the current political and cultural moment, who should people be listening to, and or what should they be reading? Looking for advice. Have to sort through all of the noise.
Go ahead.
They should be listening to a man who has represented a diverse and complex state in the heart of America for 36 years with great success in the United States Senate. And they shouldn't be reading one thing.
True.
They should be making sure that they're getting at least half the information they get from someplace that presents a perspective that they're not sympathetic to. I read every week The Nation magazine, which is to the left of Bernie Sanders, and the Weekly Standard, which is to the right of George W. Bush. I don't do it because I like it particularly. I certainly don't do it because I believe most of what I read. I have relatively left-center convictions, so neither of them are very congenial. But I think I understand what's going on much, much better because I force myself to think about things that I find alien and uncongenial. And that would be my most important advice to anybody who is thinking about what they were going to read.
I agree. I was asked this question 30 years ago. It was in Bozeman, a Rotary Club. Somebody asked me, what should I be reading? And my answer then is what it is now. It depends on whether you want to reinforce your biases or whether you want to learn something. And if you want to learn something, you got to do it. Larry just suggested, read a wide variety of stuff. I don't know. I try to read, the basic mainline national papers. Frankly, one paper I like a lot is the Financial Times. I think it's an excellent newspaper. And the Wall Street Journal is not bad either. The New York Times okay. I put the Washington Post fourth among all that I read. I read a lot of Chinese periodicals too. One's the South China Morning Post, which I think is quite objective. It's owned by Jack Ma, but still it's quite objective. Then there's a business periodical there. It's called Caixin. It gives very good analysis of business developments in China. So you got to read a lot of stuff. And you got to temper it just with common sense too. It's meet with people. I don't know how it's hard to meet people all the time, but it's just get out and just talk to people. Get grounded and rooted by just. This is not terribly relevant, but when I first started running for public office, and I went to see Montana Governor Forrest Anderson, and he says, Max, I'll tell you what, if you want to know what's going on, don't listen to all these experts. You just go down Main Street. Just talk to people on Main Street. Just go to the coffee shops and just talk to people. That's where you're going to get your best intelligence to what's going on.
Well, we shared earlier today, we asked Larry what his biggest surprise about Montana is. And he said just how big it is and how vast it is. And I said, well, you're going to love tonight's session because as you rightly remember, Max walked across the thing twice. not once, but twice, doing just that. And a long way to walk, but a great way to learn.
Well, I don't know. I couldn't read many newspapers. I got walking.
You know, I just have a couple minutes left, and I want to just close with a question on leadership. You know, you both have been leaders in so many ways. You've worked with leaders, presidents, U.S. foreign leaders, ambassadors. You know, what are the characteristics of the most successful leaders you've worked with, you've seen, and who are those folks? Share with the group maybe some of the best leader you've worked with.
Well, there are people whom I've admired, and then there's also general qualities, which I think are important. I'll start with Mike Mansfield. He's my inspiration. He's the reason I got in public service. There's no one quite like Mike. It's so solid. There's a reason why he's majority leader for 17 years. No other person's been leader of the majority of the United States since Mike, because he was so trusted, and they knew his word was gold. And he led by bringing people together. He led by being patient. Mike was extremely patient. So let things kind of work together with all those senators and figure out, be patient so they get together a little better, and so for that kind of thing. Then there are other people, in history. I mean, Winston Churchill, clearly, led Britain, and he had such a command of the English language. When you read his speeches, it's just, it's spine tingling. They're just so good, and how he rallied Britain during the war. It's stunning. And then also, FDR, for example, his fireside chats and the New Deal. He brought America together, and frankly, this is real leadership. When the country was quite isolationist between the wars, President Roosevelt would talk to Winston Churchill how to, under Lend-Lease, try to help with the war effort over there. Montanans were very isolationist at that time. We had a senator there who led the effort to try to keep America out of the Second World War, and a congresswoman too voted against it. But FDR saw what needed to be done, stepped ahead. He knew what was right, the right thing to do, as difficult as it was, given the politics of the time. So a good leader just got to do the right thing, and so forth. And another category, I think, a good leader's got to be you got to lead. You set the vision, you set the direction. Then you're a coach. You hire the best people possible, and delegate. Let them do their magic as you're coordinating them, then getting them to help make sure they're all going in the right direction. And it's strong synergistic feeling there. And I was very lucky in the Senate. I was blessed with brilliant people in my staff. I think I had the best staff in Capitol Hill. And it's because we really worked hard to get really good people.
They're all saying A's higher A pluses and B's higher C's.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my answer.
I've had the great privilege of working fairly closely with two U.S. presidents, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. They were very different. You had a meeting with Bill Clinton at 9:15 in the morning. You really didn't need to worry just when you were going to get in your office, because that meeting wasn't going to start at 9:15. But not to fear, it was going to start 10 minutes late, but it was going to end 20 minutes late. So you were going to get more time than you expected. If you'd written a memo to President Clinton before the meeting, he might have read it, or he might not have. But if he had not read the memo, he would look at it, he would turn the pages at about this pace, and he would master the content of your memo. He would discuss what his perspectives as president on the issue were, but he would also discuss what your perspectives as Deputy Secretary of the Treasury should be. He once said to me, "You know, Larry, I was reading in the White House library. There's some new thinking in economics about dividend behavior. Have you considered that in your tax plan?" I literally once heard him give an 8-minute lecture to the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Transportation, about alternative forms of environmentally friendly concrete. He spoke with the Secretary of State about anthropological and historical discoveries about ethnic divisions in 14th century Bosnia and their significance for today. And then he kind of ended meetings, and you weren't 100% sure what the conclusion was, but you learned a lot and you were inspired and you went off better. Barack Obama, if you had a 9:15 meeting, you better be in your office at 9:05 because it might start early. If the meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes, you better say whatever you had to say, because after 25 minutes, his secretary was going to come in and hand him an index card, and after 30 minutes, you were going to be out of there. If you were the economic advisor and you needed advice about dividend behavior and subordinated debt, President Obama thought he probably had the wrong economic advisor. So he wasn't going to really spend his time giving you advice on those questions. He was going to focus on the questions that only he as president could focus on, how whatever you were talking about integrated with whatever else. And he was going to go around the room when the meeting was coming to an end and ask everybody whether they had anything they wanted to add. And then he would, in a very crisp way, summarize his main judgments coming out of the meeting. Do whatever you think is best about this, this, and this. If you want to do anything different from this, then you need to come back to me. And those were two very different approaches to leading the staff. And I guess I learned two different things that I hadn't fully appreciated till I worked for those two presidents. The first was, to thine own self be true. Bill Clinton couldn't have led effectively the way Barack Obama did. Just wouldn't have been him. Barack Obama couldn't have led effectively the way Bill Clinton did. It's not that one was better and one was worse, but something that I think all the best leaders have is they're kind of comfortable with who they are and the way they do things, and they have that comfort, and they do it in a way that works for them, and they're not trying to fit into some particular model or some particular image of what a leader should be. And I think the main problem actually with leadership books as I read them is they tend to say this is what a leader is. And they tend not to neglect that what a leader is they're kind of themselves. You know, Churchill, he was wonderful in all the ways you say, but he didn't need to take a nap for 2.5 hours every afternoon because of what he had drank in the morning. But he was a great leader. And so you have to do it. You have to be a leader in a way that's true to yourself. And the other thing I learned watching the two of them that I think is very important in the way we view our leaders is they were both prepared to be political. They didn't think it was wrong to think about the politics. Not because they put the next election ahead of everything else, though they cared about passionately about the next election. Not because they were craven and cynical and just in it for the admiration, though they wanted to be appreciated, but because they recognized that goodwill was like capital. You had to build it up, but there was no point in building it up if you weren't prepared to spend it on the things that were really important. And so, yeah, they would let a senator have an IRS office where the senator wanted an IRS office. Yeah, they would make a deal on a lot of things. But they did it because they knew there were going to be moments when the chips were down, when emergency money was needed for the financial crisis, in President Obama's case, when the vote to let China into the WTO was a close-run thing, in President Clinton's case, that they needed to build up goodwill so they could spend it on the things that were most historically important. And that's not an ignoble political thing. That's a really terribly right and noble political thing. And I think that idea of building up goodwill by being political is another aspect of leadership that I was privileged to learn from President Clinton and President Obama.
I might add there too, it's really true. When you go to a meeting with Bill Clinton, it's very clear. He knew more about your subject than you did. Almost every meeting, that was always the case. It was stunning. And he always read lots of books. And remember once I said, Mr. President, what are you now reading? He said, Guns, Germs, and Steel. So I went out and bought the book. It was a great book. Finished that, and I saw him later. Mr. President, now what are you reading? Against the Gods. So I bought that book. It's a great book. But when he left, I lost my presidential recommendations.
Yeah. That's a loss. Well, look, I could keep this conversation going all night. I wish we could. I want to be respectful of both of your times. I shared with this group about a little under a year ago, before I became president, but knew we were going to be, Chelsea and I were going to be moving here. Larry was kind enough to share his time and insight about what it's like to be a university president, how some of the challenges, some of the opportunities. Gave us some great advice. One point, we shared this at dinner, that he made, the best institutions that I go to, I visit and talk, he said, the best one, I can tell the difference between a good and a bad one. The bad ones, I come in, I give one talk, and then I have my free time. The good ones, I'm booked back to back to back to back to back. So Larry, maybe...
If I'd known I would be visiting,
Exactly.
I might not have given that advice.
So my point is, we've kept him and Elisa both pretty busy today, so we want to end, but I would be remiss. We read both of their obviously very accomplished biographies at the beginning, but I think what's most striking, and it came through here, is what you can't read on paper, what you don't see is your continued commitment, Max, to service, and you both embody what it means to be a servant of this country, a servant of your fellow citizen. Max, what you and Mel are continuing to do with the Bacchus Institute and providing opportunities for students to have the experience that you had as a young person, and going to Washington, D.C., seeing and opening their eyes to a whole other world that they couldn't have imagined for themselves. We just can't thank you enough for that. And Larry, you're continuing, and I see your interactions with students, the continued interactions with students at Harvard, and the commitment that you're making to those who are coming after you is truly astounding, and I really deeply appreciate both of your willingness to share a little bit of your experience and thought with us tonight. So thank you both
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
We have a little something for each of you. I think we're gonna. So many of you will know that Larry and Elisa were on a road trip, and so we don't need to give Max this map, but we figured Larry and Elisa could use because they had to drive so long across the state of Montana, we give them a map, as well as a hat for you. So, and you know, the same to Max. Max represents the whole state. He and Mel live in Bozeman, but we always want to make sure that he's wearing a really good as often as possible. Thank you, guys.